The world stands on a knife's edge. Tensions between nations have never been higher. Powerful alliances prepare for the unthinkable, while leaders deliver veiled threats behind closed doors. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and humanity could spiral into the deadliest war in history, World War III. The first spark. In the South China Sea, a U.S. destroyer collides with a Chinese frigate during a tense standoff over disputed waters. Both nations trade accusations, but within hours, China launches missiles at nearby U.S. bases. The news spreads like wildfire, shattering fragile diplomatic ties. In Moscow, the Kremlin calls for an emergency session. Russia, already locked in a cold rivalry with NATO, declares support for China and warns Western nations to stay out or face consequences. The world watches as decades of quiet tension finally erupt into chaos. Markets crash overnight. Oil prices surge, currencies plummet, and citizens across continents wake to an uncertain dawn. Nobody realizes it yet, but the chain reaction has begun, and there's no turning back. Alliances form. NATO responds swiftly, calling an emergency summit in Brussels. U.S. generals demand immediate retaliation, while European leaders urge caution. Behind the scenes, secret deals are struck to mobilize troops without public panic. China, meanwhile, solidifies alliances with Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Billions of dollars in weapons and drones are exchanged overnight, and satellite surveillance intensifies as armies prepare for war. The divide between East and West deepens beyond repair. Across social media, fear spreads like wildfire. Hashtags trend globally: WW3, global conflict, and nuclear alert. Citizens flood grocery stores and fuel stations, bracing for the unknown. First blood. In the early hours of a cold January morning, hypersonic missiles streak across the sky. Guam, Okinawa, and U.S. bases in the Philippines are struck within minutes. Thousands are killed instantly. The Pacific Ocean becomes a graveyard of burning ships and aircraft. America retaliates. Fighter jets scream across the night sky as strategic bombers leave their bases. Chinese naval fleets in the South China Sea are pounded relentlessly, leaving wreckage scattered across the waves. Meanwhile, in Europe, Russian armored divisions roll toward the Baltic states. NATO deploys rapid response units, and the first clashes erupt in eastern Poland. The whispers of war are over. It has begun. Cyber Armageddon. While the world focuses on missiles and tanks, a silent war unfolds online. Massive cyberattacks cripple U.S. power grids, plunging entire states into darkness. Hospitals fail, stock exchanges freeze, and transportation grinds to a halt. China unleashes AI-driven malware that shuts down Western satellites, blinding intelligence operations. In retaliation, NATO infiltrates Chinese banking systems, draining billions in state reserves overnight. For ordinary people, the war becomes personal. Phones stop working, ATMs run dry, and supermarkets empty within hours. Civilization begins to fracture at its core. The expanding front. The Middle East becomes a boiling cauldron of chaos. Iran seizes the opportunity to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off a third of the world's oil supply. Saudi Arabia retaliates, sparking a new regional conflict that spreads rapidly. India and Pakistan clash on their borders, with artillery fire lighting up the night. Skirmishes turn into full-scale battles, pulling South Asia deeper into the storm. Africa isn't spared either. Proxy wars erupt as global powers fight for control over rare earth minerals and resources, leaving millions displaced and starving. The nuclear shadow. In Moscow, military leaders propose deploying tactical nuclear weapons to break NATO's supply lines. Western intelligence intercepts the discussions, and Washington moves its nuclear submarines into strategic positions. The world watches live as Russian missile silos open for the first time since the Cold War. NATO responds by activating DEFCON 1, placing all nuclear forces on highest alert. Humanity stands seconds from extinction. For a moment, the world holds its breath. Leaders hesitate, knowing one wrong launch could turn cities into ash and plunge the planet into nuclear winter. Cities in flames, London becomes the first European capital hit by a Russian hypersonic strike. Within seconds, central districts are engulfed in fire. The death toll soars as emergency services collapse under the destruction. New York suffers a devastating cyber attack that triggers explosions across key infrastructure. Bridges fall, subways flood, and millions flee on foot, desperate to escape the chaos. Tokyo faces its own nightmare as Chinese drones swarm the city, striking power plants and communication hubs. Panic spreads faster than the fires consuming its skyline. The AI war machines, unmanned drones, autonomous tanks, and AI-guided missiles redefine modern warfare. Algorithms decide targets faster than humans can react, creating a battlefield dominated by machines. In Europe, NATO deploys AI-controlled defense grids to counter Russia's hypersonic arsenal. Thousands of autonomous drones engage in deadly dogfights, turning the skies into fields of fire. But machines are unpredictable. A Chinese AI system malfunctions, mistakenly targeting civilian zones, sparking global outrage and forcing governments to question the ethics of AI-driven warfare. The fall of economies. Global economies collapse under the weight of endless war. The dollar crashes, the yuan follows, and entire nations spiral into bankruptcy. Millions lose their jobs overnight, and poverty surges to levels unseen in modern history. Cryptocurrencies explode in value as citizens flee collapsing banking systems. Black markets thrive, becoming the only lifeline for food, medicine, and fuel. By now, the global economy has fractured into fragments, with survival replacing prosperity as the world's primary concern. The rise of resistance. Amid the chaos, resistance movements emerge worldwide. Civilians form underground networks to smuggle supplies, hack enemy systems, and sabotage military operations. In occupied Eastern Europe, rebels strike Russian supply lines, forcing the Kremlin to divert precious resources. Across Asia, anti-war protests grow into massive uprisings, destabilizing governments from within. Ordinary people, once powerless, become the deciding factor in the survival of their nations. The battle for the skies. Supersonic jet fighters dominate the battlefield as air superiority becomes the key to victory. Entire air fleets vanish in minutes under relentless missile barrages. Space becomes the new front line. Nations launch anti-satellite weapons to blind each other's surveillance systems, turning Earth's orbit into a graveyard of shattered debris. With global communications crippled, military strategies falter, forcing leaders to gamble everything on dwindling resources. The turning point. After years of destruction, NATO regroups under a unified command, launching a massive counteroffensive to reclaim lost territory in Europe. China suffers heavy setbacks after a critical cyber failure disables its missile systems. Russia, drained of manpower and resources, faces mounting rebellions at home. The tides of war begin to shift, but at an unimaginable cost. Billions are dead, and entire regions lie in ruins. The last gamble. Desperate to secure victory, Russia and China prepare a joint nuclear strike against key NATO cities. Submarines carrying hundreds of warheads move into hidden positions beneath the Arctic ice. In response, NATO readies a preemptive strike, setting the stage for the most destructive exchange in human history. At the last moment, back-channel diplomacy sparks a fragile ceasefire. Humanity teeters on the edge of annihilation and pulls back. Aftermath. The war ends, but the world is unrecognizable. Cities lie in rubble, oceans are poisoned, and skies are clouded with ash. Governments collapse under debt and billions are displaced as refugees. Diseases spread rapidly, famine takes hold, and humanity faces an existential crisis. From the ruins, New powers rise, alliances forged not by ideology, but by survival. A fragile peace. Years later, a new world order emerges. Nations rebuild, but the scars of World War III remain etched in every city and every mind. Artificial intelligence, now heavily regulated, becomes humanity's tool for restoration rather than destruction. Renewable energy replaces fossil fuels, and disarmament treaties outlaw nuclear weapons. But beneath the surface, old rivalries still simmer. The lessons of history fade, and humanity walks once again on the thin ice of global tension. World War III nearly ended us, yet survival came at an unbearable cost. Humanity rebuilt, but the question remains, have we learned, or are we doomed to repeat history? The answer lies not in the past, but in the choices we make today.